There's a specific kind of silence that settles over you when you've done something unforgivable. It's not the absence of sound, it's the presence of something heavier, something that lives in your chest and presses down on your lungs every time you breathe. I've carried that silence for 6 years now. 6 years of dinners with my brother where I laughed at his jokes and clinked glasses and told him I loved him. 6 years of watching him struggle to rebuild a life that I quietly dismantled with my own 2 hands. 6 years of him looking at me with admiration, with gratitude, with a trust so pure it makes me want to vomit every time I see it reflected in his eyes. My name is Marcus Cole. I'm 34 years old. I work in corporate finance at a firm that handles portfolios worth more than most people will ever see in 10 lifetimes. I have a corner office. I have a BMW in a reserved parking spot. I have a fiancée named Rebecca who thinks I'm a good man because that's the version of myself I've shown her. And I have a younger brother named Daniel who calls me every Sunday without fail, who names me as his emergency contact on every form, who told me last Christmas that I was the only person in this world he could truly count on. He said that to me, to my face, and I smiled and hugged him and told him the feeling was mutual. But here's the truth, the ugly, rotting truth that I've buried so deep, I sometimes forget it's there until the middle of the night, when it crawls back up my throat and sits on my tongue like poison. I destroyed my brother's life. I did it deliberately. I did it methodically. And I did it because I was jealous of him in ways I still don't fully understand. And the worst part isn't what I did. The worst part is that he still doesn't know. He still thinks I'm innocent. He still thinks the world failed him through bad luck and circumstance and timing. He still thinks I'm the one person who stood by him through all of it. I'm not confessing this to anyone who can punish me. Not yet, anyway. I'm confessing it because I can't carry it anymore. Because last week, something happened that made me realize the walls I built around this secret aren't as solid as I thought they were. Because for the first time in 6 years, I'm genuinely afraid that Daniel might find out what I did. And I don't know if I want him to find out or if I'm terrified of it. Maybe both. Let me start from the beginning. Not the beginning of the betrayal itself, but the beginning of who we were before any of this happened. Because you need to understand the context. You need to understand why I did what I did, even though there's no justification for it. You need to understand that I wasn't born a monster. I became one slowly, through 1,000 small choices that seemed harmless at the time. Daniel and I grew up in a house that looked perfect from the outside. Big lawn, white shutters, 2 cars in the driveway, parents who attended every school event and smiled for every photograph. We were the family that other families envied at neighborhood barbecues. We were the Christmas card family, the vacation photo family, the everything is fine behind closed doors family. But inside that house, there was a quiet competition happening that I don't think my parents ever fully acknowledged. My father was a surgeon. My mother was a corporate attorney. They valued success above almost everything else, and they measured success in very specific ways. Grades, achievements, recognition, trophies and certificates, and acceptance letters from prestigious institutions. I was the firstborn. I was supposed to be the standard bearer. And for most of my childhood, I was. I got straight A's. I made varsity soccer. I was accepted to an excellent university on a merit scholarship. I did everything right. I checked every box. I made my parents proud in all the ways they needed me to. But then Daniel came along and something shifted. Daniel was 3 years younger than me. And from the moment he could walk and talk and think for himself, it became clear that he was different. Not better, necessarily, but different in a way that drew people to him. He had this warmth about him, this effortless charisma that I could never replicate no matter how hard I tried. Teachers loved him. Kids wanted to be his friend. Adults would comment on how charming he was, how thoughtful, how genuinely kind. I was the achiever. Daniel was the beloved. And for a long time, I told myself that was fine. I told myself we occupied different spaces, that there was room for both of us, that his gifts didn't diminish mine. But as we got older, I started to notice things. Little things at first. The way my mother's eyes would light up when Daniel walked into a room. The way my father would brag about Daniel's natural intelligence to his colleagues, as if my straight A's had been expected, but Daniel's were somehow miraculous. The way family friends would ask about Daniel first at gatherings, then turn to me almost as an afterthought. I became the reliable son, the dependable one, the one who would always do what was expected. Daniel became the special one, the one with potential, the one everyone was excited to see what he'd become. I want to be clear about something. Daniel never did anything wrong. He never tried to outshine me. He never competed with me directly. If anything, he idolized me growing up. He wanted to be like me. He copied my hairstyle, asked to borrow my clothes, begged me to let him tag along with my friends. He loved me with the unconditional adoration that only a younger sibling can have. And I loved him too. I did. I still do, in my own broken way. But somewhere along the line, love and resentment started to coexist inside me. They became so tangled together that I couldn't separate them anymore. I would feel genuine affection for my brother in one moment and burning jealousy in the next. I would celebrate his victories publicly and seethe about them privately. I would tell him I was proud of him while secretly hoping he would fail. This is what I mean when I say I didn't become a monster overnight. It happened gradually, a slow erosion of the brother I should have been. By the time we were both adults, Daniel and I had taken very different paths. I went into finance. I climbed the corporate ladder with the same methodical determination I'd applied to everything else in my life. I made good money. I bought nice things. I dated appropriate women. I became exactly what my parents had always wanted me to be. Daniel went a different direction. He studied computer science, but his passion was in building things, creating things. He was an entrepreneur at heart, always sketching out ideas for apps and platforms and digital solutions to problems most people hadn't even identified yet. He bounced around for a while after college, working at startups that never quite took off, burning through his savings on projects that didn't pan out. My parents worried about him. They would call me and ask if I thought Daniel was okay, if he was wasting his potential, if he was ever going to settle down and get a real job. And I would tell them that Daniel was finding his way, that he just needed time, that he was talented enough to figure it out eventually. But privately, I was relieved. Relieved that I was finally the successful one. Relieved that Daniel's shine had dimmed a little. Relieved that for once, I was the son everyone was proud of while Daniel was the one causing concern. That relief lasted until Daniel turned 26. That was the year he finally found it. The idea that would change everything. I still remember the night he called me about it. It was late, almost midnight, and I was already in bed when my phone rang. Daniel's voice was breathless with excitement. He couldn't sleep, he said. He'd been working on something for months, and he'd finally cracked it. He needed to tell someone. He needed to tell me. The idea was for a financial management platform, not just another budgeting app, but something more sophisticated. Something that would use predictive algorithms to help small business owners manage cash flow, anticipate expenses, and make smarter financial decisions. He'd been developing it with a small team, just 3 people including himself, working nights and weekends in a cramped apartment that doubled as their office. He explained the technology to me in rapid, excited bursts. The machine learning component, the integration capabilities, the user interface they'd designed to make complex financial data accessible to people without finance backgrounds. He'd already built a working prototype. He'd already tested it with a few local businesses. The feedback had been overwhelmingly positive. But here was the thing. Daniel didn't just want my congratulations. He wanted my help. He knew I worked in finance. He knew I understood the industry from the inside. He knew I had connections, relationships with investors and executives, and people who could open doors that would otherwise remain closed. He wasn't asking me to give him anything. He was asking me to introduce him to the right people, to vouch for him, to help him get his foot in the door. I told him I was proud of him. I told him this sounded like exactly the kind of project he'd been building toward his whole life. I told him I would absolutely help him however I could. And I meant it. In that moment, I genuinely meant it. But then something happened. Something inside me shifted in the days following that phone call. I started thinking about what it would mean if Daniel succeeded. Really succeeded. Not just scraped by or found moderate stability, but actually built something significant. Something that made him wealthy. Something that made him important in ways I would never be. I started imagining the family dinners where Daniel would be the one everyone wanted to hear from. The holidays where his success would be the main topic of conversation. The proud looks on my parents' faces that had always been reserved for me, now redirected toward him. And I started thinking about how easy it would be to stop that from happening. I knew people Daniel didn't know. I had access to information Daniel didn't have. I understood how the industry worked in ways Daniel, for all his brilliance, simply couldn't. If I wanted to help him, I could open doors that would change his life. But if I wanted to destroy him, I could do that too. The thought came to me one night while I was lying in bed, unable to sleep. It arrived fully formed, like a dark gift from a part of my mind I didn't know existed. I could sabotage Daniel's opportunity, and he would never know it was me. I could kill his dream quietly, secretly, and he would blame bad luck instead of his own brother. I tried to push the thought away. I told myself I wasn't that kind of person. I told myself I loved my brother, and I would never hurt him. But the thought wouldn't leave. It stayed with me through the next day and the day after that. It whispered to me during meetings and dinners and quiet moments alone. It asked me questions I didn't want to answer. Questions like, don't you deserve to be the successful one? Haven't you worked harder than him? Doesn't he get everything handed to him while you have to fight for every scrap? The jealousy I'd carried for years wasn't dormant anymore. It was alive and demanding, and it wanted me to act. I spent 2 weeks wrestling with myself. 2 weeks of sleepless nights and distracted days. 2 weeks of looking in the mirror and asking myself what kind of man I really was. And then I made my decision. God help me, I made my decision. The opportunity Daniel was chasing wasn't just any opportunity. It was a pitch to a venture capital firm called Harrington Partners. They were one of the most prestigious early-stage investors in the fintech space, and getting a meeting with them was nearly impossible for someone without connections. But Daniel had earned that meeting on the strength of his prototype and his pitch alone. He'd submitted his materials through their open application process, and somehow made it through multiple rounds of screening. His meeting was scheduled for a Friday in March. He was going to present his platform to 3 partners, including the firm's founder, Gerald Harrington. If it went well, he would receive initial funding. If it went very well, he would have the resources and backing to turn his idea into a real company. Daniel was nervous but confident. He called me the night before the meeting to run through his pitch one more time. He asked for feedback. He asked if there was anything he should anticipate. He asked me to wish him luck. I wished him luck. I told him he was going to crush it. I told him I believed in him. And then, after I hung up the phone, I sent an email. The email went to a contact of mine at Harrington Partners. Not one of the partners, but someone who worked in their research division. Her name was Christine, and we'd met at an industry conference a few years earlier. We'd kept in touch casually, exchanging occasional messages about deals and trends and gossip. She liked me. She trusted me. In my email, I told Christine that I'd heard through the grapevine that a company called FlowSync, Daniel's company, had a meeting scheduled with her firm. I told her I had some concerns I felt obligated to share, off the record, as a professional courtesy. I told her that the founder, Daniel Cole, was my brother. I told her this wasn't widely known, and I preferred to keep it that way. I told her I was sharing this information with a heavy heart, but I couldn't in good conscience stay silent. And then I lied. I told her that Daniel had a history of exaggerating his technical capabilities. I told her that his previous ventures had collapsed due to his inability to execute on promises. I told her that I had personally witnessed him take credit for work done by others. I told her that as someone who loved him but knew him well, I wouldn't trust him with a serious investment. I told her I hoped this information would remain confidential, but that I felt the partners should be aware before making any decisions. I clicked send. And then I sat in the darkness of my apartment for an hour, feeling sick to my stomach, but also feeling something else. Something I'm ashamed to admit. Relief. The meeting happened as scheduled. Daniel presented his platform to the partners. He answered their questions. He showed them his prototype. He did everything he was supposed to do. And then they turned him down. The rejection came by email 3 days later. Professional but brief. They appreciated his time and his innovative approach, but after careful consideration, they had decided not to move forward. No specific reason was given. No feedback was offered. Just a polite, impersonal no. Daniel was devastated. He called me that night, his voice cracking with confusion and disappointment. He didn't understand what had happened. He'd thought the meeting went well. He'd thought they seemed genuinely interested in the technology. He'd prepared for months. He'd done everything right. I listened to him process his pain. I offered comfort. I told him that venture capital was brutal and arbitrary and that a single rejection didn't mean anything. I told him he'd find other investors. I told him I still believed in him. What I didn't tell him was that I was the reason the meeting went poorly. What I didn't tell him was that by the time he walked into that conference room, the partners had already been warned about him. They'd already been given a narrative about who he was and what he was capable of. His presentation never had a chance. The rejection from Harrington Partners was just the beginning. What I didn't anticipate was how quickly my lie would spread. Christine, my contact at the firm, wasn't just a research analyst. She was well connected in the fintech investment community. She moved in circles that overlapped with other firms, other funds, other people who made decisions about which startups lived and which ones died. Word travels fast in tight-knit industries, especially when that word is a warning about a potential bad actor. Within weeks, Daniel started noticing something strange. Other investors who had seemed interested were suddenly going cold. Meetings that had been scheduled were being canceled. Emails were going unanswered. Doors that had been open were closing, one by one, with no explanation. He couldn't understand it. His product was strong. His team was committed. His vision was clear. But everywhere he turned, he was hitting walls that shouldn't have existed. I watched this happen. I watched my brother's confidence erode as rejection piled on rejection. I watched him burn through his savings, trying to keep his company alive. I watched him reassure his team members, even as they started looking for other jobs. I watched the light in his eyes dim week by week, month by month, and I did nothing to stop it. There were moments when I almost confessed, moments when the guilt became so unbearable that I would pick up the phone or start typing an email, ready to tell Daniel everything. But every time I got close, something held me back. Fear, mostly. Fear of losing him. Fear of becoming the villain I knew I was. Fear of facing the consequences of what I'd done. So I stayed silent. And I watched. FlowSync officially shut down 8 months after the Harrington meeting. Daniel's 2 partners had found other opportunities. His funding had completely dried up. His prototype, the brilliant piece of technology he'd spent years developing, was shelved indefinitely. The night he closed the company, Daniel came to my apartment. He sat on my couch and drank whiskey and told me he felt like a failure. He said he couldn't understand what had gone wrong. He said he kept replaying every decision, every pitch, every conversation, trying to figure out where he'd made his mistake. I poured him another drink and told him he hadn't made any mistakes. I told him sometimes the world just wasn't ready for certain ideas. I told him he'd learn from this and come back stronger. I told him I was proud of him for trying. And he looked at me with tears in his eyes and said, "I don't know what I'd do without you, Marcus. You're the only one who never gave up on me." That was 6 years ago. In the time since then, Daniel rebuilt his life, slowly and painfully, but he rebuilt it. He got a job at a mid-sized tech company, doing work that he finds intellectually interesting, but not creatively fulfilling. He bought a modest apartment. He dated a few women, none of whom lasted. He made peace with what happened to FlowSync, though I know he still thinks about it sometimes. He still wonders what could have been, and I continued my climb. I got promoted twice. I earned bonuses that would have funded Daniel's startup 10 times over. I got engaged to Rebecca, who comes from the right family and says the right things and will make an excellent partner for the version of myself I present to the world. For 6 years, I told myself I'd gotten away with it. For 6 years, I told myself that what I'd done was in the past and couldn't be changed, and the only healthy thing to do was move forward. For 6 years, I convinced myself that the guilt I carried was punishment enough. I was wrong. 3 weeks ago, I received an email from Christine. I hadn't heard from her in over 5 years. Our correspondence had faded after the FlowSync incident, partly because I felt uncomfortable maintaining the connection, and partly because she'd moved on to other opportunities. The last I'd heard, she was working at a different firm on the West Coast. Her email was brief. She said she was moving back to the city. She said she'd love to grab coffee and catch up. She said she had some news she wanted to share. Normally, I would have ignored it or made an excuse. But something about her tone made me uneasy. It was too casual, too friendly. Like she was pretending the email was about one thing when it was really about something else. I agreed to meet her. We chose a coffee shop in Midtown, neutral territory for both of us. She looked different than I remembered. Older, obviously, but also harder somehow. There was a sharpness to her that hadn't been there before. We made small talk for a few minutes. Career updates, industry gossip, mutual acquaintances. She asked about my engagement, and I gave her the polished version of my relationship with Rebecca. She nodded and smiled, but her eyes were watching me in a way that felt deliberate. And then she said it. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, Marcus, about my career, about the decisions I've made, about the information I've passed along over the years." I kept my expression neutral. "What do you mean?" "I mean that when you're in our industry long enough, you start to notice patterns. You start to realize which whispers were true and which ones were strategic. You start to understand the difference between genuine warnings and personal vendettas." My heart rate increased, but I didn't let it show. "I'm not sure I follow." Christine took a slow sip of her coffee. "Your brother's company, FlowSync. I looked into it recently, did some digging, talked to a few people who were involved." "Why would you do that?" "Because the things you told me about him didn't add up. They never really did, if I'm honest. But I was young, and I trusted you, and I passed them along without questioning. That's on me. But I've had 6 years to think about it, and something always bothered me." I said nothing. I couldn't say anything. My throat had gone dry. Daniel Cole never took credit for other people's work, Marcus. His former team members speak incredibly highly of him. The ventures he was involved in before FlowSync didn't collapse because of him. They ran out of funding for completely legitimate reasons. Everything you told me was either exaggerated or fabricated. She paused. Let the words settle. "You lied to me. And because of your lie, I poisoned your own brother's reputation in the investment community. I effectively killed his company before it had a chance to succeed." I wanted to deny it. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that her investigation had led her to incorrect conclusions, that the information I'd shared had been given in good faith. But I couldn't. The lie wouldn't come. Christine leaned forward. "I'm not going to pretend I'm blameless here. I passed along information I should have verified. I trusted a source I shouldn't have. That's something I have to live with. But I want you to understand something clearly." "What's that?" "I'm not sure yet what I'm going to do with this information. I've spent weeks thinking about it. Part of me wants to tell your brother what really happened. He deserves to know. Another part of me thinks that's not my place, that if anyone tells him, it should be you. I felt a chill run through me, despite the warmth of the coffee shop. Christine, I'm not here to threaten you. That's not what this is. I'm here to tell you that I know, and to suggest strongly that you consider telling him yourself before someone else does. She stood up, collected her bag, looked at me one more time. You have a brother who still loves you, Marcus. That's more than a lot of people can say. I'd think very carefully about whether you want to lose that. And then she left. I sat in that coffee shop for another hour after she was gone. My coffee went cold. The afternoon light shifted through the windows. People came and went around me, living their normal lives, unaware that mine was threatening to collapse. For 6 years, I'd believed my secret was safe, but secrets have a way of surfacing. They find cracks in the walls we build around them. They wait for the right moment to emerge. Christine's visit forced me to confront something I'd been avoiding for a long time. The question of what happens next. If I do nothing, Christine might eventually tell Daniel herself. She seemed uncertain about it in the coffee shop, but uncertainty can shift. She might decide that Daniel's right to know outweighs her discomfort in being the messenger. She might tell someone else who tells someone else. And eventually, the truth reaches Daniel through a channel I can't predict or control. If that happens, I lose not just my brother's trust, but any chance to explain myself. I become the villain in a story told by others, with no opportunity to provide context or seek understanding. But if I tell him myself, that's where my thinking breaks down. Because I've tried to imagine that conversation 100 times over the past 3 weeks, and I can't get past the first few sentences. How do you tell someone you love that you deliberately destroyed something they cared about? How do you explain jealousy that deep, resentment that ugly, choices that unforgivable? And more than that, how do you face the possibility that telling the truth might be worse than keeping the secret? Right now, Daniel loves me. He trusts me. He thinks I'm the one person in his life who has never let him down. That belief gives him something. It gives him a foundation, a touchstone, a reminder that unconditional love exists. If I tell him the truth, I take that away. I don't just confess my own sin. I rob him of something he values. I force him to rewrite his entire understanding of our relationship. I make him question not just me, but his own judgment, his own ability to trust, his own sense of who he can rely on. Is my need to unburden myself worth that cost? I don't know. I genuinely don't know. What I do know is that this secret has been poisoning me slowly for 6 years. It's affected my relationship with Daniel in ways I couldn't acknowledge until now. Every time he calls me, I feel a twinge of guilt. Every time he asks for advice, I question whether I deserve to give it. Every time he tells me he loves me, I wonder if he would say those words if he knew what I'd done. I've been a good brother on the surface. I've shown up when he needed me. I've offered support and encouragement and practical help. I've been the reliable Marcus, the dependable Marcus, the Marcus everyone expects me to be. But underneath that performance, there's a rot, a decay, a hollow space where genuine connection should be. Daniel and I don't have a real relationship. We have a relationship built on his ignorance and my deception. And I'm starting to realize that pretending otherwise is just another form of betrayal. Rebecca noticed something was wrong. Of course she did. In the days after my meeting with Christine, I became distant, distracted. I would start conversations and then trail off mid-sentence. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling while she slept beside me. Finally, she asked me what was going on. I almost told her. For a moment, I almost told her everything. But I stopped myself because I knew what would happen if I did. Rebecca loves the version of me I've presented to her. She loves the successful, confident, morally upright Marcus, who earns good money and makes good decisions and never lies about important things. If I told her what I did to Daniel, she would see me differently. She might not leave me. Our relationship is practical as much as romantic, but something fundamental would shift. She would always know, in the back of her mind, that I was capable of that kind of cruelty. She would wonder what else I might be capable of. So I told her I was stressed about work. A big deal that wasn't coming together. Normal professional anxiety. She accepted the explanation. She offered comfort. She told me she believed in me. And I felt the same sick relief I'd felt 6 years ago when I sent that email to Christine. The relief of getting away with something. The relief of the lie holding just a little longer. I'm tired of that relief. I'm tired of what it costs me. Last Sunday, Daniel called as he always does. We talked for almost an hour. He told me about a project at work that he was excited about. He mentioned a woman he'd been seeing. Nothing serious yet, but he liked her. He asked about my wedding planning and offered to help with anything I needed. And then, near the end of the call, he said something that stopped me cold. "Marcus, do you ever think about flow sync?" I felt my stomach drop. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. I've been thinking about it lately. Maybe because things are going well at work and I'm starting to feel like I might be ready to try something on my own again. Not right away, but eventually." "That's great, Daniel. You should. When you're ready." "I know, it's just—" He paused. I could hear him thinking through what he wanted to say. "I've never really understood what happened back then. I've made peace with it, mostly. But sometimes I still wonder if there was something I missed. Some reason the investors all turned on me at once." My heart was pounding. I gripped the phone tighter. "The industry is brutal. You know that." "I know, but it felt personal sometimes. Like there was something happening behind the scenes that I didn't have access to. Does that make sense?" I closed my eyes. "Yeah, it makes sense. Anyway, I'm probably just paranoid. The important thing is that I'm past it. I've got a good life now. I've got you. That's what matters." "That's what matters," I repeated, the words hollow in my mouth. After we hung up, I sat alone in my apartment for a long time. Daniel was thinking about FlowSync again. Daniel was starting to question what happened. Daniel's instincts were correct. There was something happening behind the scenes that he didn't have access to. And Daniel was giving me an opportunity to stay silent and hope his questions fade, an opportunity to watch him wonder for the rest of his life without ever knowing the truth, or an opportunity to finally do the right thing. I spent the next 3 days in a kind of limbo. I went to work, I attended meetings, I performed the functions of my job, but my mind was elsewhere, cycling through the same questions over and over. I made lists, pro and con columns, like I was analyzing a business decision. Arguments for telling him, arguments for staying silent, potential outcomes of each path. The arguments for telling him were moral. He deserves to know. The truth is always better than a lie. This secret is destroying my ability to have a genuine relationship with him. I owe him honesty, even if it costs me everything. The arguments for staying silent were practical. Telling him will hurt him. He's happy now. He's moved on. Reopening this wound serves my need for absolution more than his need for truth. I would be relieving my own guilt at the expense of his peace of mind. Both sides felt valid. Both sides felt true. And I couldn't decide which one was right. On the 4th day, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to see my parents. They still live in the house where Daniel and I grew up. My father is retired now, spending his days gardening and reading medical journals out of habit. My mother still practices law, though she's cut back to part-time. They're comfortable, content, proud of both their sons, though in different ways. I told them I was in the neighborhood. A transparent excuse, since the neighborhood is an hour from where I live. But they didn't question it. They were happy to see me. We sat in the living room, the same room where Daniel and I had opened Christmas presents and watched football games and occasionally fought over trivial things. My parents asked about work, about Rebecca, about wedding planning. I gave them the expected answers. And then, without really planning to, I asked them a question. Do you think I was a good brother to Daniel? Growing up, I mean. My mother looked surprised. Of course you were. Why would you ask that? I don't know. I've just been thinking about it lately. The dynamic between us. How we were as kids. My father leaned back in his chair. You two have always been close. Different, certainly. You were always more focused, more driven. Daniel was more creative, more spontaneous. But you balanced each other well. Did I ever... I stopped, reconsidered, tried again. Did you ever notice if I was jealous of him when we were younger? My parents exchanged a look. The kind of look that contains an entire conversation, condensed into a single glance. You were both competitive, my mother said carefully. That's natural for siblings, especially siblings who were as accomplished as you two. But was I jealous? Of the attention he got? The way people responded to him? My father set down his newspaper. Marcus, where is this coming from? I couldn't tell them. Obviously, I couldn't tell them. But in that moment, sitting in the house where I'd formed into the person I became, I felt a desperate need for them to acknowledge something. To confirm that the jealousy wasn't just in my head, that they had seen it too. That maybe, on some level, they understood the pressure I'd felt to be exceptional, while Daniel was simply loved. I'm just reflecting, getting older, thinking about my life. My mother reached over and touched my hand. You were a wonderful brother to Daniel. You still are. He adores you, Marcus. He always has. I know, I said. That's what I'm afraid of. They didn't understand what I meant. How could they? They saw what everyone else saw. Two brothers who had weathered childhood together and remained close into adulthood. A success story of family bonding. They didn't see the cracks. They didn't see the rot. They didn't see the thing I'd hidden so well for so long. I left their house that evening with nothing resolved. But something had shifted inside me. Sitting in that living room, surrounded by photographs of the family we were supposed to be, I felt the full weight of what I'd done pressing down on me. Not just the betrayal itself, but the years of deception that followed. The performances, the lies, the constant maintenance of a false reality. I was exhausted, bone-tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. For 6 years, I'd been living two lives. The life everyone could see, and the life I carried alone in the dark. And I was starting to realize that I couldn't sustain both anymore. Something had to give. When I got home that night, Rebecca was waiting for me. She looked concerned. She said I'd been acting strangely for weeks. She wanted to know what was really going on. I looked at her. This woman I was supposed to marry. This woman who had agreed to share her life with me based on a version of myself that wasn't entirely real. And I made a decision. I need to tell you something, I said. Something I've never told anyone. She sat down. Her face was serious, but open, ready to listen. And I told her. I told her everything. The jealousy, the email to Christine, the destruction of Daniel's company, the 6 years of silence and performance and guilt. I told her what Christine had said at the coffee shop. I told her about the fear that my secret was about to be exposed. I told her about the conversation with Daniel last Sunday and his questions about what had happened. I told her who I really was. When I finished, the room was silent. Rebecca's face had gone through several transformations while I spoke. Surprise, then confusion, then something harder to read. Not disgust exactly, but not understanding either. Why are you telling me this now? She asked finally. Because I can't carry it alone anymore. Because I need someone to know who I really am before... I stopped. Before I decide what to do next. What does that mean? What are you considering doing? I think I need to tell Daniel. She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was careful. Have you thought about what that would mean? For you? For us? I've thought about nothing else for 3 weeks. And you're willing to risk everything. Your relationship with your brother. your family's perception of you, potentially your career, if this becomes known more widely. I don't know if I'm willing, but I'm starting to think I have to." Rebecca stood up. She walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. When she turned back, her expression had hardened in a way I'd never seen before. "I need time to process this, Marcus. This isn't—" She shook her head. "This isn't what I signed up for. I know. I'm not saying I'm leaving. I'm saying I need time. Can you give me that?" Of course. She slept in the guest room that night, and the night after that. We moved around each other like strangers sharing a space, polite but distant. The wedding planning stalled. Phone calls with vendors went unanswered. The future we'd been building together hung in suspension, waiting to see what would happen next. But something strange happened during those days of distance, something I hadn't expected. I started to feel lighter, not better exactly. The guilt was still there. The fear was still there. The uncertainty about what would happen with Daniel was still very much present. But for the first time in 6 years, someone knew. Someone other than me carried the weight of this truth. And even though Rebecca was struggling with what I'd told her, even though our relationship was in jeopardy, there was relief in the honesty. I realized that the secret had been killing me more slowly than I'd understood. Every day I carried it, it took something from me. Energy, joy, the ability to be fully present in my own life. It had become such a constant presence that I'd stopped noticing how heavy it was. And now, even partially unburdened, I could feel the difference. That's when I knew what I had to do. On a Thursday evening, 10 days after my conversation with Rebecca, I called Daniel. "Can we meet tomorrow?" I asked. "There's something I need to tell you, in person." He sounded concerned. "Is everything okay?" "I don't know, but I need to talk to you about something important." "Of course. Where?" I suggested a park near his apartment, somewhere public but quiet, somewhere we could talk without being overheard, somewhere that didn't carry the weight of family history or shared memories. He agreed without further questions. That was Daniel, always trusting, always assuming the best. I barely slept that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, rehearsing what I would say. There was no way to make it sound acceptable, no framing that would soften the blow. All I could do was tell the truth and let Daniel respond however he needed to respond. The next morning, I left early. Rebecca watched me go from the kitchen doorway, but didn't say anything. We both knew what this day might mean. We both knew that once Daniel knew the truth, everything would change. I arrived at the park before Daniel did. I found a bench in a quiet corner and sat down to wait. The morning was cool and overcast, the kind of gray day that makes everything feel slightly muted. Around me, people walked dogs and jogged and lived their normal Friday lives. And then I saw him, walking toward me across the grass, his face open and curious and completely unsuspecting. My brother. My victim. The person I had loved and resented and betrayed in equal measure. He sat down next to me, bumped my shoulder with his in the familiar way he always did. "So, what's going on? You sounded serious on the phone." I took a deep breath, felt the words forming in my throat, felt 6 years of silence preparing to break. "Daniel, I need to tell you something I did to you, something I've hidden for 6 years. His face changed, just slightly. A flicker of confusion crossed his features. "What are you talking about?" And I told him. I told him everything. The same story I'd told Rebecca, but with more detail, more context, more of the internal landscape of jealousy and resentment that had led me to send that email. I told him about Christine, about the investment community, about the walls that had gone up around his company because of rumors I had started. I told him about watching him struggle and fail and pick himself back up, all while knowing I was the cause. I told him I was sorry. I told him I didn't expect forgiveness. I told him I understood if he never wanted to speak to me again. And then I stopped talking. And I waited. Daniel was silent for a long time. Long enough that I started to wonder if he'd heard me, if the words had somehow failed to land, if I needed to repeat them to make sure he understood the full horror of what I was confessing. But then he spoke. "You did that." Not a question, a statement. "You destroyed FlowSync." Yes. "You sent that email. You poisoned my reputation. You killed my company before it had a chance." Yes. "And you've known this. For 6 years. Every time you told me you were proud of me. Every time you comforted me about what happened. Every Sunday phone call, every holiday dinner, every moment we've shared since then. You knew." "Yes." He stood up, walked a few paces away. His back was to me, his shoulders tense. "Why?" His voice cracked on the word. "Why would you do that to me?" "I was jealous. I was threatened by your success. I was afraid of losing my place in the family, in the world, in my own sense of who I was. None of it makes sense, Daniel. None of it justifies what I did. But that's why." He turned around. His face was wet with tears, and there was something in his eyes I'd never seen before. A mixture of pain and anger and confusion so raw it was almost unbearable to witness. "You were jealous of me?" The incredulity in his voice cut deep. "I spent my entire life looking up to you, Marcus, trying to be like you. You were everything I wanted to become. And you were jealous of me? It doesn't make sense. I know it doesn't make sense." "You're right. It doesn't." He shook his head. "I trusted you. More than anyone else in my life. When everything fell apart, you were the one who kept me going. You were the one who told me I wasn't a failure. And the whole time, you knew. You knew because you made it happen. Daniel, don't." He held up a hand. "Don't try to explain it more. Don't try to make me understand. I can't—" His voice broke. "I can't process this right now. I know. I need to go. I need to be away from you." "Okay." He started to walk away, then stopped. Turned back one more time. "Why now? Why tell me now? After 6 years?" I thought about Christine. About the possibility of the truth emerging through other channels. About my own inability to carry the weight anymore. But in that moment, those reasons felt incomplete. Self-serving. Like I was still protecting myself somehow. So, I told him a deeper truth. Because you deserve to know who I really am. Because our relationship has been built on a lie, and I can't keep pretending anymore. Because I love you, Daniel. And I realized that loving you meant letting you see the real me, even if the real me is someone you hate. He stared at me for a long moment. His expression was unreadable. "I don't know if I hate you," he said quietly. "I don't know what I feel. I just know I need to be away from you right now." "I understand. I'll call you when I'm ready to talk. If I'm ever ready. Don't call me." And then he was gone. Walking away across the grass, disappearing into the gray morning, taking with him a relationship I had spent 6 years preserving through deception. I sat on that bench for hours. I watched the day brighten and then cloud over again. I watched people come and go, unaware of the small tragedy that had unfolded in their midst. I felt empty, in a way I'd never experienced before. Not just sad or guilty, but fundamentally hollowed out, like a shell that had finally cracked open to reveal there was nothing substantial inside. And yet, beneath the emptiness, there was something else, something quieter, peace, not happiness, not relief in the celebratory sense, but peace. The peace of having finally stopped running. The peace of having laid down a burden I'd carried for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand without it. The peace of knowing that whatever happened next, at least it would be built on truth. That was 3 months ago. Daniel didn't call for the first 6 weeks. I honored his request and didn't reach out. Rebecca and I went through a painful period of renegotiation. She needed to decide if she could build a life with someone capable of what I'd done. We're still figuring that out. The wedding is postponed, indefinitely, while we both determine what we want the future to look like. My parents found out eventually. Daniel told them, as he had every right to do. My mother cried. My father was silent, in a way that felt like a judgment more severe than any words could convey. We had a family meeting that lasted 4 hours and resolved nothing, except perhaps to establish that our family would never look quite the same again. And then, 6 weeks after I confessed to Daniel, he called. The conversation was short, stilted. He told me he'd been seeing a therapist to process what I'd told him. He said he was working through a lot of anger and grief and confusion. He said he wasn't ready to forgive me, might never be ready. But he'd realized something important. He realized that he needed to understand why. Not my surface reasons, not the jealousy and resentment I'd already explained, but something deeper. He wanted to know if there was something in our family, in our upbringing, in the way we'd been shaped as children, that had led me to become the kind of person who could do what I did. He wanted to understand, because he wanted to make sure he didn't become that kind of person too. I told him I would try to help him understand. I told him I was in therapy now too, working through the same questions myself. I told him that whatever he needed from me, space, conversation, answers, accountability, I would try to provide. We've talked 3 times since then. Each conversation is difficult, raw, honest in ways that hurt both of us. We're not brothers again, not in the way we were before. We might never be, but we're something. 2 people trying to excavate the truth from the wreckage of what I destroyed. Last week, Daniel said something that surprised me. He said, "I've been thinking about FlowSync, about what would have happened if it had succeeded." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've been imagining the alternate universe where you didn't send that email, where the investors backed me, where the company grew and I became successful in the way I'd always dreamed. And I don't know if I would have been happy. Not really. Not deep down. Because my success would have been built on the foundation of our relationship, and our relationship was already broken even then. I just didn't know it." I didn't understand what he meant at first, but he explained. "You were jealous of me, Marcus. That jealousy was there before FlowSync. It shaped how you saw me, how you related to me, how you interpreted everything I did. If I'd succeeded, that jealousy wouldn't have gone away. It would have gotten worse. You would have resented me more, not less. And eventually, something would have broken between us anyway. Maybe something worse than this." He paused, took a breath. "What you did was terrible. I'm not trying to excuse it. But I'm starting to realize that the betrayal wasn't the beginning of our problems. It was a symptom of problems that were already there. Problems we never talked about because our family didn't talk about real things." He was right. I knew he was right. The jealousy that led me to destroy FlowSync didn't emerge from nowhere. It grew from years of unspoken competition, unacknowledged feelings, a family dynamic that valued achievement over honesty and performance over authenticity. I was the product of that family. Daniel was too. We were both shaped by forces we didn't choose and couldn't control. But I was also the one who made the choice to send that email, the choice to sabotage my brother, the choice to keep it secret for 6 years. Understanding the context doesn't erase the responsibility. It just makes the picture more complete. I'm telling this story now because Daniel asked me to. Not publicly, not like this. But he suggested that I try to articulate what happened. For myself, for my own healing, for the process of understanding who I was and who I'm trying to become. He said, "If you can tell your story honestly, really honestly, including all the parts that make you look bad, maybe you can start to let it go, and maybe I can too." So that's what I'm doing, telling it honestly, including all the parts that make me look bad. I betrayed my brother. I destroyed his dream. I let him believe it was bad luck while I climbed to success on the foundation of his failure. And for 6 years, I looked him in the eye and lied about who I was. That's the truth. But here's another truth, one I'm only now beginning to understand. Confession isn't the end of the story, it's the beginning. Daniel and I are both in the middle of something now, something painful and uncertain, and not at all guaranteed to work out. We don't know if our relationship will survive. We don't know if trust can be rebuilt after a betrayal this profound. We don't know if I can become the kind of brother he deserves, or if the damage is permanent. All we know is that we're trying, imperfectly, slowly, with setbacks and difficult conversations and moments when it seems like it might be easier to just walk away. But we haven't walked away. Not yet. I'm not asking for absolution. I'm not telling this story to make myself seem sympathetic or to excuse what I did. I was wrong. Completely, unequivocally wrong. And Daniel would be justified in never speaking to me again. But he chose differently. He chose to try to understand. He chose to engage with the truth instead of running from it. I don't know why he made that choice. I've asked him, and he doesn't fully know either. Maybe it's because we're brothers, and some bonds are harder to sever than others. Maybe it's because he sees something in me worth salvaging, even if I don't always see it myself. Maybe it's just because he's a better person than I am and always has been. Whatever the reason, I'm grateful. Not in a way that feels earned or deserved, but in a way that feels like grace, like something being given that I have no right to expect. The last time I saw Daniel, we met for coffee at a quiet place near his apartment. We sat across from each other and talked for 2 hours about everything and nothing. Work, family, the woman he's been dating more seriously now, my uncertain relationship with Rebecca. At the end, as we were getting ready to leave, he looked at me and said something I won't forget. "You're not the brother I thought you were, Marcus. You never were. But maybe now I can start to know the brother you actually are." I didn't know how to respond. The words were neither forgiveness nor condemnation. They were something more complex than either. They were honesty, real honesty, the kind our family never practiced. We hugged before we left. It felt different from all the hugs that came before, less comfortable, less familiar, but somehow more real. Like we were holding on to something fragile and new instead of something solid and old. I walked away from that coffee shop with something I hadn't felt in 6 years. Hope. Not certainty. Not confidence. Just hope. The possibility that things might get better. The belief that truth, even painful truth, might be the foundation for something stronger than the lies I'd built. I'm 34 years old. I have a corner office and a BMW in a reserved parking spot. I have a fiancée who may or may not become my wife. I have a family that looks at me differently now, with questions in their eyes that weren't there before. And I have a brother who knows who I really am. It's not the life I planned. It's not the story I would have written for myself. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the stories we would write for ourselves are always less true than the stories that actually happen. Daniel still doesn't call every Sunday. He's not ready for that level of normalcy yet. But he calls sometimes. And when he does, I answer. We talk about things we never talked about before. The jealousy, the competition, the pressure we both felt growing up. We talk about our parents and their flaws and the ways they shaped us without knowing it. We talk about forgiveness, what it is, what it isn't, whether it's even possible after something like this. We're not where we were before I confessed, but we're somewhere. And somewhere is better than the nowhere I was living in for 6 years. I don't know how this story ends. Maybe that's because it's not over yet. Maybe it won't be over for a long time. Maybe ever. Maybe the real work of healing takes longer than any confession, longer than any apology, longer than any single conversation can accomplish. But I know this. I'm not hiding anymore. For the first time in 6 years, I'm showing up as myself, the real, flawed, damaged self that I am. And that's something. It might not be enough, but it's a start. Daniel is the better brother. He always was. And now, finally, I can admit that without the jealousy that used to twist it into something ugly. He's better than me, kinder than me, more capable of forgiveness than I deserve. But I'm his brother, For whatever that's worth now, for whatever it might be worth in the future. I betrayed him, and he still gave me a chance. I don't know if I would have done the same if our positions were reversed. I don't know if I have that kind of grace in me, but I'm trying to learn. That's all I can do now. Try. And hope that trying is enough.